After you've been there for like nearly a year or more, and you do blood, sweat and tears, pull it all apart and have a big mess and think, how am I ever going to put this back together again and make it look like it used to? When you see it at the end with it all landscaped and all painted and all finished, it looks fantastic. It would have toppled over. It was like getting to that stage because of the tree roots pushing it at the front. And they're all significant trees that couldn't be damaged.
Well, the fence was in pretty poor condition really initially when I first viewed it. The front side of the mausoleum was probably the worst for whatever reason. It was a challenge. I thought it was going to be a challenge, and I was right.
So the whole idea of the job was to move the fence away from the trees and the tree roots because the trees were significant and they couldn't be removed.
James and I were mainly responsible for removing the fence. They had a small excavator on site, and that enabled, because it's all solid bar and quite heavy. And they're about 3.3 metres long, each section, thereabouts. Probably close to 300 kilos. So I wouldn't want to be lifting it by manual means, no.
So the whole philosophy is to do conservation and conserve as much as the original fabric as possible. So we endeavoured to reuse as much as the old stone as practically possible. The bottom rail of the fence was actually touching the stone, so you couldn't see the damage of the stone. The original fence, all the metal uprights, the bars, went into the stone every 150 mils. The bars rust and expand and act like wedges and blow the stone apart. So after we took the fence off, we realised that most of the coping stones were damaged beyond repair, and they all had to be basically replaced. I think out of all of them, where there's probably, I think it's like 21 metres on both sides, so that's 42 metres and 36 metres across the front, there was one coping stone that was reused.
It was in quite bad condition, yeah. We cut out some of the materials that couldn't be saved, and then it went to get sandblasted, and then returned from there with a primer coat. And then we worked on it after that.
So it was the brief of the job to move the fence 1.5 metres forward. And so we had to excavate by hand and by machine around the tree roots. And some stones were unable to be recovered because they were part of the trees. So we couldn't remove them without damaging the tree or the tree roots. So those ones had to be replaced when the wall was moved forward. So like I said, we had to excavate for the new footing and then place these new screw piles at certain intervals around tree roots. They had a certain bearing weight that they had to go down to achieve, and when they put the screw piles in, they screw them down and then they get a reading. Once it reached a certain depth and that bearing weight, it was acceptable, just depending on the soil and the soil conditions below. The steel, as per the engineer's specification, was installed on top with the screw piles in them, and then formwork formed around, and then concrete pumped from a pump on the street into the strip footing. To be honest, like the old footings were just sandstone footings, so they just went down straight onto dirt, really. So the new fence has a far more substantial footing than what it ever had before. So this time it's going to last for at least a couple of 100 years until the trees grow bigger.
Because where it was originally into the sandstone wall, it had rusted and deteriorated, and we needed a clean square bottom essentially on. This is not it obviously, but we needed a clean bottom to put the flat bar and fit the new flat bar on. And we jigged it up so that everything was straight and parallel off the top rail. Just deburr any sharp edges or anything. And then we marked it all out, and we're able to cut it then so it'd be all the same length and straight. There were some interesting little stamps that had become apparent as we were working through it, just little Easter eggs hidden here and there. It's just really very interesting to find. Basically, it's a manufacturer's stamp from England, with the crown being on it, amongst other things.
Every stone is like numbered and given an identification of where it is in the wall and what course it's from. So then we measure each stone because it's all got to go back exactly the same as what it was before. And if the stones are replaced, then they're replaced at exactly the same dimensions. So even though they look uniform, that no, not one single stone is basically the same length. They're the same height and the same width, but they're not the same length. The original stone's probably quarried on site, but that's never going to happen these days. So to get the like A-class quality heritage restoration stone that's going to have the best longevity, we used the stone from the minister's stockpile centenary stone program, and you have to actually like apply to use the stone and get them to sign off to say that it's a worthy project. So we get a block and then we have to put it on our machine. It's a 5-axis profile machine. We have to take templates from site of what the actual shape it is. And you save like 2 weeks work just by cutting out all the bulk, and so it's like a godsend really. And chisel finished, this is all chisel finished by hand as well. So we had to chisel it all, and sparrow peck, it's a certain type of finish that the stones have. So there was a fair bit of work in each stone really to make it match the same as what it was before. Not only were there capping stones to replace, there was also a couple of piers which had a quadrifoil in them, which is a sunken Gothic feature that was done in our factory here by hand. But then a couple of them, they've had previous repairs and they split like on the bed lines of the stone, and we had 5-6 pieces of pier that we actually had to glue back together and put pins in and like conserve and make a Frankenstein pier.
The gates were actually in very good condition. There wasn't a lot to do to the gates. We rebuilt the hinges and the in-ground pivots, and we freed up the mechanism, and the gates were in excellent condition really. We had to get some new X's and O's. We called the X's and O's job. So that we had to get new X's and O's recast to match the existing. And the interesting thing about it was the front section of fence was horizontal, but either side had a rake on it, so the X had a different length to it as it come down each side of the slope. The zeros were the same as the front. They were just pivoted a little bit, but the X's were completely different from the front. There was probably maybe 60 or 80 X's in the whole thing to remake, and probably 30 or 40 of the double O's. We got some good originals that we made copies of and recast in steel.
Each, like when we're making the stones, each like whether it's an apprentice or a tradesman, they put their banker mark in there. It's not really like something that's necessary anymore, but everyone does it so they can say, oh, I made that stone, or I made that stone. And so then when you're on site, if something's wrong, you can say, oh, so-and-so made that stone. But it is good though. I actually put my banker mark in all the stones that I make. I'm like proud of like the stones that I've made. So I want everyone to know in 100 years time that I made it, even though they'll probably have no idea what my banker mark means. But for me, I will know. It's traditional stonemasonry really, that all the stones have the joints punched. If the joints are smooth, the lime mortar doesn't attached to each side properly, so it's like a frog in a brick. And we also have a thing called a joggle, which is like a Y, and the two Ys join together to the two joggles on each stone when they go up against each other and fill up with mortar, and it acts like a mortar pin, keeping the stones in place. If you don't have those things, then all the stones move around all over the place and they don't stay together correctly.
The wrought iron is fantastic metal. The original is always the best, I think. Generally speaking, the finishes are really in quite good condition. Some of them had erosion to the side a little bit, but nothing structural that would deem it necessary to change them. They've got an extra patina in them and identity, and I think it's part and parcel of what it is, and we shouldn't change that.
So we did the front part of the wall first, and then the right hand side looking at it. On this occasion, because we moved the wall 1.5 meters forward, the front was all perfectly square and plumb because we rebuilt it all, and the right hand side was okay because it didn't have any trees that were right up against the wall, but then the left hand side had several trees that were still pushing the wall out and out of plumb and out of level, so it was wavy both ways. When we were going to put the new coping stones on there, and we trying to put a string line from one part to another so we could get the fence straight, it was realised that it wasn't going to work. If the wall is wavy, and the fence won't look right, and you spend all this money on doing like a fantastic job with the other two sides, to have one side that just like wouldn't have looked right, and then everyone would have been saying that that doesn't look right. And there was meetings on site and consultation between everyone, and it was decided to move the top pier out 1 metre to get it away from all the trees and the tree roots, and that way then we could dismantle the wall, do a little bit of extra footings and straighten it plumb and level. You know, the right decision was made because you can't even tell that the other pier was even moved out of alignment, and you know, the trees are probably grown, they're probably 50 or 60 or 80 years old, I'm not sure how old they are, they're big though, but they're not going to grow onto the fence and push it out, you know, for the next however long, then the fence will be fine.
Due to the overlap on the top rails and all the horizontal rails, that had to be removed in a certain order, the last one first and the first one last, and then we had to reverse that order when we replaced them. So once the first one was in, the second one goes on top, and then the third, and so on. It was a very complicated thing to put back together again because it had so many moving parts. The X's and the zeros are locked in by the vertical bars at the joints where it overlaps. So it's all happening in that location where the stayback is. So as we're putting down the bars, it was starting to grab everywhere. Tap, tap, tap. It can grab very quickly.
We usually, you know, you lay the stones on a lime mortar bed, and then it all has to be like level and built to the correct measurements of each course. Otherwise, the fence won't go back in properly. We use like bars and levers to manoeuvre the stone into position, but you don't want to damage any of the edges or the arrises, because you want it to look like a brand new pristine block, not with chips all out of it everywhere. And then you make the bed a little bit bigger, maybe by a couple of mils, and then you use a hammer kind of like to sweeten it into position to get the right level. The mortar, actually we use shell lime, so we collected oysters from the fish markets and burnt them in a kiln and made lime from oyster shells as what they would do traditionally. And so like our mortar that we rebuilt the wall is basically exactly the same as the mortar that was used to build it originally. You lay all the stones into position. They all fit together correctly with a nice 5mm joint. You fill the perpendicular joints with grout, which is just a liquid lime mixture that's poured in. That fills up the joggles. They lock together properly and fill it all the way up to the top. And then we point it with the shell lime mortar. Usually the bedding mortar is maybe a little bit different to the pointing mixture. When you're doing the bedding, you never see it, so you don't have to be precise when you're mixing it. Even though we mix all the mortar in our factory and then we take it in barrels out to the site. But the colour and the texture, when you do the pointing, has to be exactly the same so it all looks even. So that's why we do a bedding, which you put the stones in with, and then you do a pointing mix, which you go back and you point it all so it all looks nice.
You get accumulative errors if you try and mark it all out, and it only takes a couple of mil here and there to, and it's such an organic system that you just have to let it go in and we'll mark it out after and then take it away and drill it. We didn't want to fill the sandstone wall with unnecessary holes.
The staybacks, or backstays, I call them backstays, Roy calls them staybacks, but the backstays are to support the fence, like moving laterally, I suppose. And so we had to install the fence and then install the backstays, and then so we made sure that they were in the correct position. We installed them after the fence was actually done, because otherwise the backstays wouldn't fit properly.
Where the extension was, there was 1.5 meters extended to either side. Everything had to be made individually. A lot of different processes involved. So it being imperial measurements, we don't have imperial measurements here anymore, unfortunately. So we had the machine parts and cast pieces, and those two locations there was a new backstay made as well. So the bars themselves, it was 3/4 inch, 7/8 and an inch. So we basically had to replicate that in today's language, and as long as the horizontal bars as well, we had to make those identical, and the stepped overlap as well. There was 3 different types of spearhead, so that was again a case of remaking those finials. The small one, and then the medium, the top rail, and then the large one where the staybacks are. The stayback or the backstay, depending on what way you want to say it. So basically every single part was individually made to match the existing. I realised that the original manufacturers had changed the centres of the bars towards the end of the piers. So once they approached the corner piers, they had already been built, but they changed the actual centre by about 2 mil. So we had to copy that as well, because we had to finish all the vertical bars at the same distance of the sandstone pier. Otherwise it just wouldn't have looked right.
Well, it was decided that because previously the had so many holes in the capping stones, that it would only have 3 holes per fence panel, where before it might have had 30 holes. We used stainless steel as well, where it went into the stonework. So, and they would pour traditionally with molten lead. In the spirit of recycling, we do lots of like lead flashings, or lead from that was already in the holes of the fence. We take that all out and we save it all up, and then we melt it all down in the crucible. We heat it up and then pour it in. On the front part of the fence it was like level, so when you pour the molten lead, it's easily like finds its own level, and on the sides it was on a rake, so we had to use clay to make like a little dam type of thing to get the lead to not all run down the hill, so it filled up the hole properly, because the last thing you want is the water sitting in the top of the hole and not have it filled up properly, because then it starts rusting out the steel and make the whole kind of process happened all over again. Once the molten lead is poured in there, you have to like trim it up and make sure it's filled up all the way to the top and nice and neat. If any lead goes out of the hole, then you use like a sharp chisel and chisel off the excess lead and make it look all nice and pretty, and so it looks good.
We're really very happy the way that extension turned out, actually. Yeah. We did take a lot of care because it's obviously a very important project for us, and we try to always do the best we can, and because it's there for many, many years. I want to show my children one day. Maybe they'll take up the trade, maybe they're not.
I've been a stonemason since 1988 when I was like 15, and I've worked on Vaucluse house several times before, and someone told me once that the buildings are like extended members of your family, and that you work on them and you are like great to love them, and so you think, oh, I've worked on that part, I've done that part over there, I did this bit here, so they do become like family members and like children that you learn to love. Sometimes you don't love them very much because you have to do really difficult things, but if it's you know, if it was easy, then everyone would be doing it. So now the mausoleum is the newest member of my family.
You just have to take your hat off to the original artisans, and that's it. You know, it would have been, I guess, nice to have a time machine to go back and see how, you know, how it was all done, but just a beautiful design of railing. It's just, I think it's stunning. Yeah, it really is. Other than that, I think that's it.